Welcome to the CEO Shift Show, helping specialized service business owners build a business that runs without them. Hi, I'm Carol Surbey, and today we're getting into something I see play out with specialized service operators more than almost any other gap in the business. You're good at what you do. Your clients like you. You get referrals, and you still wake up wondering why your pipeline feels inconsistent. Why some months are full and others feel like you're starting from zero. Today we're unpacking that with a real client story that makes structural problems impossible to ignore. A concrete framework for diagnosing your own lead gen gap, and the one shift that separates service businesses that scale from service businesses that plateau. Let's go. Here's what I want to put on the table before we get into Edward's story. In most specialized service businesses, the owner doesn't have a lead gen strategy. They have relationships that have worked so far. These aren't the same things. A strategy is intentional, repeatable, and doesn't depend on whether someone happens to remember your number. Relationships are valuable. I'm not dismissing them. But without a system behind them, they have a ceiling. And most service business owners hit that ceiling, and then they call it a market problem. Today, you're going to see exactly where that ceiling comes from. Edward McKenzie owns a low voltage system company in the central United States. Firearm systems, security, commercial property, specifically apartment complexes. He spent years working towards buying this company. And when that purchase date finally arrived and the ownership transfer was complete, he thought the hard part was behind him. It wasn't. The company Edward inherited had been run almost into bankruptcy by the previous owner. The books had been manipulated, and the revenue that looks solid on paper was built almost entirely on commercial contracts. The kind that carry 60 to 90-day payment cycles and the net margins of 6 to 8%. So think about that. Edward's team was doing the work, fronting the materials, and waiting 3 months to collect on jobs that barely covered the cost of running them. He told me, I don't want to continue to being the bank for these projects. And I can't. I don't have the money. So Edward made a call that took real clarity. He was going to exit commercial almost entirely and go all in on reoccurring service calls. The model where you get paid in 30 days, not 90. The model where margin is 20%, not 6%. And he said something in our session that I wrote down. A $4 million service company is as big or bigger than a $10 million construction company. He wasn't wrong. He was looking at net. And on net, the service model wins. But here's where the real problem surfaced. His commercial business had survived on roughly 10 general contractor relationships a year. 10 people who called when they had a project. 10 referrals that kept the calendar full. Enough to make it work. The service model required something entirely different. To hit Edward's goal of 100 service calls a week, he needed consistent relationship with hundreds of property managers across the entire market. When I asked him about his current reach into that market, here's what we found. There were approximately 1,500 apartment complexes in his territory that fit his ideal profile. He maybe knew 15 of them. The contacts he did have called when they had a problem, not because Edward had a system for staying in front of them, not because he had consistent outreach cadence, but because they happened to remember his number when something broke. That's not lead generation. And in a service business, trying to scale from 30 calls a week to 100, waiting is a revenue model that will break you slowly. Because slow months don't feel like a structural problem. They feel like bad luck. So I'd like to be specific about something here, because this is the part that most owners need to hear. The gap Edward was sitting on, knowing 1% of his 1,500 potential customers, it's not unusual. In specialized service businesses across environmental work, restoration work, compliance testing, safety inspections, this is the norm. Most owners know a fraction of the clients that they could be serving. And here's why. When your business runs on a handful of large contracts, 10 to 15 clients a year, relationships carry you. You don't feel that lead gen gap because you don't need volume. One referral covers your revenue need for a month. Word of mouth feels like a strategy because the math works at that scale. But the moment your model changes, the moment you need 100 customers instead of 10, that math breaks down completely. You cannot word of mouth your way into 100 service calls a week. You cannot referral network your way into 1,500 potential accounts. The model that sustained you at 10 client is now the ceiling that's preventing you from scaling. So here's the part that surprises most business owners when I put it this way. The lead gen gap doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up as inconsistency. A packed week followed by a quiet one. A strong month followed by a scramble. You assume it's seasonal. You blame the economy. You tell yourself that if you just keep delivering great service, the referrals would come. They do come, but not at the rate your model requires. And there's no system catching the ones that fall through. So that in itself is a structural problem. Edward's business wasn't struggling because he wasn't good at what he did. He had world-class service. He knew exactly what his ideal clients were afraid of. He understood the compliance pressures, their liability exposure, their need for fast, reliable, and trustworthy service. He could walk into any property manager meeting and connect immediately. But knowing your customer is not the same as having a system that puts you in front of them consistently. So what would I have done? If I had walked into Edward's business on day one, before the inherited chaos, before the pivots, here's what I would have done first. I would have mapped the total available market. Before you can build a lead gen system, you need to know the size of the gap you're looking to close. For Edward, that number was 1,500 apartment complexes in the city he lives in. That's his total addressable market, the universe of ideal clients within his operating territory. Of those 1,500, he had relationships with roughly 1%. 15, maybe 20 properties. That's the lead gen gap. Not his attitude, not his ethics, It's purely math. And once you know the number, you can actually build it backwards. To generate 100 service calls a week, which translate to roughly $1 million in annual service revenue, how many active property manager relationships does Edward need to maintain? If each relationship generates 2 to 3 service calls on average, you need hundreds of accounts, not dozens. That's not a reach goal. That is a math problem with a concrete answer. The second thing I would have done is identify the market entry point. Edward told me something in our session that most business owners in his space aren't paying attention to. Private equity is buying up fire alarms and security companies across the U.S., consolidating them, raising prices, and losing the personal touch that property managers actually value. The clients who were loyal to these companies before the acquisition, they're now looking for an alternative. They want someone who actually picks up the phone or responds to a text. Someone who shows up when they said they would. Someone who is, in Edward's words, easy to do business with. It's not a minor opportunity in a market of 1,500 apartment complexes. Even capturing 5% of the disrupted accounts is 75 new clients. At an average of 2 to 3 service visits per year, that's 150 to 225 service calls annually from a single targeted positioning strategy. But Edward hadn't systematized it yet. He had the insight. He even had a few things in place to pursue it. But what he didn't have was a repeatable, documented outreach system. One that put him in front of the right property managers at the right time consistently, whether he was personally making the calls that week or not. The third thing that I would have built is the entry point touchpoint. This is the piece that a lot of service business owners skip entirely. Property managers, they have compliance deadlines, annual fire alarm inspection requirements, seasonal maintenance windows, a business that shows up in their inbox or mailbox before those deadlines, not to sell, but maybe to provide a useful checklist, a compliance reminder, a heads up about a regulation change. This earns a different kind of trust than one who only calls when they want a contract. That's lead generation with infrastructure now built behind it. Not a reach out when I have time kind of thing. It's a documented cadence, assigned ownership with tracked results. Edward said something in our session that I keep coming back to. He said, I know all of this is in my head. I just don't have it committed to anything official. It's the most common thing I hear from the specialized service owners who are stuck in their current revenue ceiling. The insight is there. The market knowledge is there. The relationships are there. What's missing is the system that makes it repeatable, the documented process that runs whether you're the one running it or not. So relationships got you here. Systems get you to 100. So here's your challenge for this week. Not for someday, but for this week. So step 1, map your total available market. How many ideal clients exist in your territory? Not your current clients, not your referral network, your addressable market. Every business, every property, every organization that fits your ideal client profile and could hire you for the service work you provide. Write that number down. Step 2, count how many of those you currently have an active relationship with. Not a name in a phone, an active relationship where they know who you are and have a communication touch point with you more than once a year. Step 3, calculate the gap. The difference between your TAM and your active relationship is your lead generation gap. That's the structural problem. That's the ceiling. And if you want to close that gap with a real system, one built specifically for specialized service businesses like yours, the CEO Lead Gen foundational tools are available at thescalableCEOacademy.com. 8 tools built around lead gen consistency, from market mapping to outreach cadence to lead tracking. This isn't theory. This is your infrastructure. And if you want to do this with support, with a professionally trained business coach who helps you build the strategy, install the system, and hold you accountable to the results, book a free discovery call at carolsurbey.com. 30 minutes will map your lead gen gap, identify your highest leverage entry point for your market, and build you a prioritized action plan before you leave. That's the CEO Shift Show for this month. If this episode gave you something to think about, or better, something to act on, share it with another specialized service business owner who's wondering why their pipeline feels inconsistent. Subscribe wherever you listen, and I'll see you next month. I'm Carol Surbey, and I'm helping you build a business that runs without you with systems that scale. I'll see you next time.